There you go.
Just jump on. All right. Welcome, welcome. So as I was just saying, we are, I'm in Vermont. So we are getting hit by the hurricane right about now. So I'm hoping if I suddenly disappear, you will know why. And then Art Gutch will take over. You have the questions, right, Art? So he's in Boston. So not necessarily a better predicament for us right now. But welcome to our fifth Opyrus writer conversation. My name is Sarah Crisp. I'm the chief content creator of Opyrus, and it is a pleasure to have you here. For those of you not familiar with the writer conversations, we started this is our fifth one. So we started this 5 months ago, and it is a monthly event that we do. And we bring on writers of different genres, authors. Last month we had the president of Scholastic Publishing, different people in the writing, author, publishing business to basically share with you their expertise, their knowledge, their insight, their tips, their hacks, and answer your questions, give you insight into their process, and really encourage you as well if you are on the fence about writing, or if you should join into the process of writing, to encourage you to do so. Opyrus is a company that is a self-betterment platform, really for encouraging people to tap their power to write. We are shifting and have shifted over the last number of months from what was really focused on just authors and publishing to now trying to encourage everyone to engage in writing for wellness, for their physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological, financial well-being. And we truly believe that everybody has a writer within. Some people need a little more encouragement and help to bring that out. And that is something that we offer at Opyrus. You can join Opyrus for free if you haven't already. And we will be discussing actually throughout our discussion with Tommy as well, some of the ways that what we're doing really overlap with some of the work he has done in terms of encouraging people to use writing as a way of processing and working through different challenges and situations in their lives. I want to, before I introduce Tommy, I want to quickly introduce you to the CEO of Opyrus, Mr. Art Gutch, and he's just going to share a few words with you about Opyrus.
Thanks, Sarah. So just a few words. The last few months, we've been engaged in a financing campaign at WeFunder. So it was our first. We've raised money before for the company, but we wanted to see what it was like to crowdfund, and we did a crowdfunding campaign that we just completed. So thank you to those that may be on the call today that helped us with that. So that was very successful. And now we're in the midst of completing a new application, a new online application that's currently called Write by Numbers, that essentially is going to help all writers, make it easier for them to start, finish, and also, as Sarah said, use writing as a way to enhance their lives physically, mentally, and financially in some cases too. What we found is that people are very anxious to write a book. A lot of people want to write a book and then sell their books. And as we all know, it's not that easy. It's not easy to write a book. And as I found after talking to thousands of authors, it's not easy to sell books either. But what I found with every person that was writing a book and completed their journey was that they all got something very positive from the process, from the journey. And that mental well-being, that accomplishment, that achievement is something that most authors will never forget. So writing a book is one form of writing. We're now going to be looking at all types of writing. And going forward over the next 90 days, we're going to be offering some different types of writing templates, if you will, or exercises that delve into all types of writing. So we much appreciate everyone that's writing, but we're also trying to get others that don't think of themselves as writers to begin writing as well. So we're very excited about what's coming in the future, and that's all I'm going to say for now. So Sarah, have a great interview. Tommy, I know this is going to be a great one. I'm going to be here listening. And if I can help with anything, Sarah, just let me know.
Sounds good.
Right,
okay, thank you.
All right,
So just so you understand the layout of how this is going to work, the first part, I'm going to be asking Tommy questions. And then following that, we're going to be taking your questions. So you have the chat box. At any point throughout the interview, if a question pops up, send it to me. I'll try to keep an eye on it. If it fits into what we're discussing, I'll try to ask it to him during. If not, we'll leave time at the end where he will directly address your questions. And we are also, with all of our writer conversations, they are recorded and then they're posted both in video format and audio format. So they're accessible after, if you know somebody who wanted to join and wasn't able to, or you want to listen back to any part of it. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guest of honor tonight, Tommy Schnurmacher. And it's really an honor to have you on tonight, Tommy. So here's the official bio. Tommy Schnurmacher is an author, journalist, broadcaster, and raconteur. His latest book, a post-Holocaust memoir, Makeup Tips from Auschwitz, How Vanity Saved My Mother's Life, was shortlisted for the Whistler Independent Book Award. Here is what the book looks like. Phenomenal read, available on Amazon, and audio version coming out in October. His memoir tells the compelling story of how his mom got two infamous Nazis to save her life and the impact that had on their turbulent relationship. Sparkling with humor and chutzpah, it's a story of cultural collision and delightful dysfunction with the growing pains of shtisel, the earthiness of The Simpsons, and the family loyalty of The Sopranos. Prior to the pandemic, Tommy was a guest at the Vancouver Jewish Book Festival. Since then, he has done Zoom presentations about the book to audiences across Canada and the US. Tommy was a longtime show business columnist for the Montreal Gazette and the host of a highly rated daily 3-hour radio talk show on CJAD in Montreal for more than 20 years. He is the winner of the Golden Ribbon Award presented by the Canadian Association of Broadcasters, and is also the author of The Gold Digger's Guide, How to Marry Rich. Canada is not a real country, and Are We On Yet? Inside Secrets on How to Be Interviewed. So we'll see if I pass by then. Tommy is on the board of directors of the Foundation for Genocide Education in Montreal, and he spent an entire week with John Lennon and Yoko Ono at the Bed In for Peace. He narrowly avoided a war over the lyrics to Give Peace a Chance, and he has covered the Academy Awards 13 times. He once proposed marriage to French actress Catherine Deneuve. Okay, you did the last name. And he is still proud of that Oscar-winning actress Meryl Streep once stepped on his foot in the lobby of the Beverly Hills Hotel. So he has quite a colorful past, very interesting and humorous, and much of this included in the book as well. But to dive right in, Tommy, I want to ask you, so to begin, you spent years writing nonfiction, working as a journalist, writing about other people's lives and situations, and interviewing other people about their lives and situations. What would you say is the key to getting people to really open up, give you that insight, that unique slant, that great quote, so that when it comes to writing, you're offering something really unique to your reader?
I think one of the important issues is you have to listen. You have to listen to the answer when you're speaking to people. And I remember when I was writing a gossip column, they said, well, how do you decide what to put into the gossip column? I said, well, if it's somebody famous, anything they do is of interest. If it's Tom Cruise, then what kind of toothpaste does he use is of interest. If you're not Tom Cruise, if you're not well known, then you have to do something extremely unusual. Now, when it comes to interview technique, there's excellent interview technique and so-so technique and terrible technique. The terrible technique is you've got a list of questions, you're going on to the next question. If in the middle of it, I said, oh, by the way, on the way here, I had a car accident and ran over 3 people. And instead of paying any attention to that, you just go on to the next question. That's a bad interview because the person's not paying attention. listen to what the person is saying. You might have to jettison, get rid of your next question and go somewhere else with that. The key is to listen and to ask somebody how they feel about it, what made them do that at that particular moment. Now, there's good interviewers and bad interviewers. There's good guests and bad guests. There are people who are terrible. Having been an interviewer myself, you're asking people questions and their answer will be yes or no, a one-word answer, and then in radio it just sits there and there's radio silence, which is horrendous. So people do want to talk about themselves. They do want to express themselves in an interview and when they're writing, and you have to be prepared for an interview. And that other book that I wrote, How to Be Interviewed, Are We On Yet? How to Be Interviewed. People would come, and what they would do is they'd come into my studio, Sarah, and they'd have a whole bunch of notes. Like they'd have 4, 5, 6 piles of notes spread all over the table. And when I asked them a question, they said, well, it's, and they're busy looking for the notes. I said, what are you doing? This is not a test. It's not a final exam at the university. I'm asking you about yourself. If I were sitting next to you on a bus between New York and Boston and asked, what do you do? Would you go to your luggage and take out notes? You'd be able to answer right away. If I sat next to you in a coffee shop and was asking about what you did, it's a natural conversation. That's what you have to do. It's conversation. Tell me as an interviewer what you would say in the coffee shop if somebody asked you that question. So, and you have to keep asking. Like when somebody's answered a question for you, you go, well, why did you do that? And well, how come you did that? Or what was your reaction when you did that? Keep going on the same thing to find out more, to draw out more from people.
I had a different question, but now we're going to continue with one based on what you just said, because I was listening
Sure.
so well to everything you said. But really, when you made, first of all, I'm curious to know when you made the switch from more of the nonfiction journalistic type of writing to more of the memoir, but also if your experience in so many years of asking people questions really resulted in you asking yourself these questions and finding the way to bring out. I think one of the struggles a lot of people have is, it's like what you said, we have so much we want to say, and then we're asked a question. It's like, ooh, where do I begin? Or what's interesting? Or how do I start? Or where do I go? Did you find that your experience actually helped you almost self-interview to go into memoir writing?
Yes, it does help. Now, I've interviewed a lot of other people. It was nonfiction. You're right. It involved a lot of research and interviews. How did I move on to memoir? I would tell funny stories about my life and my mother's life and coming to Canada as an immigrant and what it was like when I was 5 years old and 6 years old and didn't speak a word of English or French and came to Montreal. And Gort Sinclair, who was the news director of the radio station I was at, CJV, he said, you know, one of these days you're gonna have to write a book about your family stories. They're quite entertaining and quite funny. And I said, okay. And one day I decided to do that. And I needed to have a structure or a deadline. I can't work without a deadline. At the Gazette, when I had to show up and write a column and had to be in by 3, Sarah, it was in by 3. At the radio station, when I had to be there at 7:30 in the morning, I was there at 7:15. I'm always on time. But if there's no deadline, then I can't do anything. I can't handle it. I need a deadline. So I never got around to memoir because there was no deadline. I was writing my own book. I could write it on my own time. There was no deadline. There was no taskmaster. So as a result, what I did is I was on St. Catherine Street in Montreal, walking into a tiny little bookstore called the Arco Bookstore, and I had a sudden epiphany. I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to give it away. I'm going to make a promise. And so I went on Facebook and I said, I am going to write 500 words to 1,000 words every single day, and it will be up by noon. If I don't have it up by noon, I told my Facebook friends, then you have a right to be very angry with me. So now, of course, I had this imposed deadline. It would be very embarrassing if I didn't do it. So I started doing that, and I did that for a number of days. And, you know, Costco gives you samples. They don't give away the whole roast. After a while, I stopped giving away like that. But that was a very important part, to set that deadline. Now, you brought up, Sarah, something very interesting in your question. about people wondering if they want to know how to write. Well, what's interesting and where do I start and what should I say and what should I not say? All of those questions are important, but not at the beginning. And I want to compare it to a sculptor. Think of a sculptor. He's going to make a beautiful sculpture out of clay. So he's going down to the basement. He's bringing up a big lump of clay, puts down the clay in front of him on the table. What's he going to say? Oh, it's ugly. It's terrible. No, it's nothing yet. It's the raw material. It's not supposed to be anything yet. Then he's going to squeeze and push and this and that, and it'll change and modify, and it'll become something. When you're sitting down to write, this is a very important piece of information I'm going to give you, which is very valuable. It doesn't matter what you write. Write it down. Is it your grocery list? Write it down. Is it what your aunt said on the phone when she was complaining about the air conditioner? Write it down. Write it all down. It doesn't have to be brilliant, great, funny, entertaining, emotional. It doesn't have to be anything. It's the clay. It's the raw material. Put it down. Later on, you might get rid of it. You might edit it. You might improve it. That's coming later. First, deposit tush in the chair, sit down and start typing on your computer and write down whatever. This business about writer's block, let me let you in on another secret. There is no such thing as writer's block. No such thing. Is there such a thing as plumber's block? The plumber shows up, oh, I can't, I'm sorry. I can't look at your clogged up sink. I'm just not in the mood. Usually I'm very inspired by toilets and sinks and bathtubs, but I'm just not in the mood, so I can't do it. Of course not. He'll go unplug the sink. As a writer, the same thing. Write it down. Did I tell you to write Macbeth or Hamlet? No, write something. And if it's the following, I'll give you an example. This is terrible. I don't know what I'm writing. This is horrible. No one's possibly going to be interested in any of this. Write that down. Just keep typing away. Write that down. Eventually, then it'll morph onto something else. So, well, I'm really annoyed. Why am I saying these things about myself? Well, you know what? So-and-so, that lady down the street, that neighbor who moved in, she wasn't very nice to me. She once said something very insulting. No, you're moving on. You're moving into something else because you got tired of saying, this is boring. It's no good. Once you get that out of your system, once you've said that 3, 4, 5 different ways, you've run out of things. And so you continue to write. It can be anything. At the beginning, this is not going to be published, what you're putting down that day. This is raw material. This is the clay. You're going to form it later. You're going to work on it and manipulate it and change it later. The point is to get it down first. And what's very important, and I like the mission of Opyrus about this in terms of, it's very important because no one else, get this, no one else has your story. No one on earth but you. 7 billion people, but your specific story, the way you view the world, the way you see everything, only one person actually has that ability. That's you. And you can only be yourself. You can't, like, I'll confess something to you. For the reason it took me so long to get around to Memoir, I was a very big admirer of the novelist Philip Roth. And another one, Mordecai Richler, who was a Canadian novelist, an equal to Philip Roth, a genius, etc. And I thought to myself, read this incredible masterpiece by Philip Roth, by Mordecai Richler. There's no point in writing. There's no point in writing. Why should I write a novel? I can't possibly match that. It's never going to be as good as that. And it took me years and years to figure out, I'm not supposed to write a Philip Roth novel. I'm not supposed to write a Mordecai Richler novel. I'm the only one who can write a Tommy Schnurmacher book because nobody can be Tommy Schnurmacher like I can. That's a whole different story. Nobody has my story. Nobody's lived my life but me. So, and it's important that be recorded, that be available, whether it's for yourself, for your family, for a stranger, for anybody, for people to see how you viewed the world, because you view it differently from anybody else. So that's another important thing. Don't criticize yourself at the beginning, and don't try to compare yourself to this one or that one. I don't sing like Mariah Carey, so I'm never going to sing. I'm never going to sing. That's ridiculous. You're not supposed to be like Mariah Carey. So it's the same thing. It's like, it's so important to be yourself. And actually, it's easy to do. Like to try to be, if I'm trying to be like Sarah Crisp, it's going to be difficult for me to do. I don't know exactly how that's done, right? But I know how to be Tommy Schnurmacher. I don't have to think about that or rehearse that. That I know. That's what you need to do to be success in radio as a broadcaster. And that's what you need to do to be successful as a writer, whether you're planning to sell books and make money at it, etc., or you're just planning it as a way to express yourself. And you can write something down. And let me tell you, a year from now, when you read what you wrote about that neighbor and how she wasn't very nice to you, she said, that'll trigger something else a year from now, later. So when I started writing the memoir, Makeup Tips from Auschwitz, How Vanity Saved My Mother's Life, I had notes in all kinds of books and booklets all over the place. And I looked, okay, what am I going to do today? Took out the first book of notes and booklets. Okay, I'm going to start writing about this topic. I'll write down 5 or 6 topics. What am I in the mood for? I'm in the mood for this. So I'm going to write about this. Again, keep in mind, it's not supposed to be Shakespeare, Roth, or Richler. It's supposed to be me typing something of how I see the world onto a page.
I think that's huge what you said, both in terms of having the deadline, which is very counterintuitive. I think we're always, the writer sitting on the beach or sitting on their porch and not having deadlines, and the creative process comes. Likewise, when I have a deadline, I mean, it's amazing what I can bust out. Give me no deadline. I have 3 books I've been working on for years and years that, because there's no deadline, don't happen. And it's funny because we're about to launch a writing meditation. And the first thing I started with, probably for myself, knowing I needed that, was this is going to take you 10 minutes or less, and it's actually timed. You have 5 minutes, go. Don't self-edit. Don't think about it. Actually just write with that exact idea, because what comes out, even if you choose to lose it, can trigger something else. And just by writing, I think everybody's written something and gold comes out, and you never would have known if you tried to write it. It's only because you just wrote it that it came.
Right.
And so that's like, really powerful advice. I want to go from here into what you were just talking about a bit, with this idea of the processing and what comes out through all these different notes. The book is really, you focus on yourself as a second generation Holocaust survivor. And a huge focus, obviously, is your mother, who was one of the only survivors of her entire extended family. And clearly any book that is going to have a connection to the Holocaust is going to be a very difficult, tough topic. And yet you managed to create a book that's actually really enjoyable to read, that is humorous, that is almost fun. It's so completely antithetical to what you would think you would be getting into when you're talking about a survivor's story. And yet every single anecdote and story that you share still seems to be very wrapped up and connected to these lessons that she laid out for you and that were foundational to your life from her experience, like key ideas about you can't lose yourself in what's true to you, and that you need to have chutzpah, force what you want and what you need and make it happen, because that's all you have is you. So as you were creating this book, can you talk about how those elements kind of were tied up in the writing process for you?
Well, in other words, the most shocking part of my mother's life is that she was in Auschwitz, and she survived Auschwitz. And Irma Greza, the she-wolf of the SS, one of the female commandants of Auschwitz, singled her out and saved her life. And I tell the story of how that happened. And my mother was vain, and she didn't like her outfit, and so she exchanged her bread for a needle and thread and polished her shoes with the coffee. And when Greza saw that, she singled her out, and she became her personal assistant during the war, tending her garden, etc. And that's what saved her life. But that was an important part of her life, but it wasn't the only part of her life. She had a great life before as a teenager growing up in a small town in Hungary. She had lots of nerve. She had chutzpah, she had vanity, and she cared about how she looked inside the death camp. She managed to go through the Hungarian Revolution. She was very funny. So all of that is part of her story. Auschwitz, yes, that's part of her story. Being funny is part of her story. Talking back to Robert Redford is part of her story. Reading Omar Sharif's poem at the Cannes Film Festival is part of her story, even though she doesn't know how to read poems. So all of those fit in. That's what creates a full person. That's what creates a full story. In other words, when someone's a Holocaust survivor, it doesn't mean that it's all sadness. Was it tragic and horrific what she went through? Of course it was, 100%. And that is mentioned. But what did she get out of that? How did she react to that? What did she do with that during it? And what did she do with it afterwards? And it was that chutzpah that helped. And let me tell you something about what we've been going through with the pandemic and now with the Delta variant. And people say, "Oh, I've had enough. Like I'm done with this COVID business. It's enough. It's just too much. So horrendous." Think about it. Hello, horrendous. What are you talking about? Is it what we were used to, the lap of luxury before? No, it isn't. But compare it to what was going on there. You didn't know if you would be alive the next day. You didn't know if you'd ever see relatives alive again. What are we worried about with COVID? Is the Wi-Fi going to still be okay? Will I be able to watch Netflix? Is my Amazon Prime subscription going to come in? What I ordered on Amazon arrived a few days late. As far as problems go, these problems are amazing to have compared to that. So whenever I got depressed or very upset or very concerned about COVID, I thought to myself, I compared it to what my mother had gone through, and all of a sudden it just fell apart. That was not to say that it's not easy, and people have gone through unbelievable tragedy and lost their job and not had to worry about money, etc. But again, it paled in comparison to that. So knowing that my mother was a survivor, I learned a lot of those survivor skills. And compared to what's going on, like what we're having today, it's not a Holocaust. It doesn't compare to the Holocaust. Nothing, of course, compares to the Holocaust.
I think one of the things that's most striking to me in the book is that, and this is about memoir writing in general, part of it is that when we're writing about, if it's our story or the story of a loved one, we're creating a history for ourselves, for our families of this person. And yet what you've accomplished is not just created something everlasting of your mother and of her story, and as an individual and a really unique person that we get to know, not just as a Holocaust survivor, but in her entirety as this very colorful human being. But simultaneously, you really created a historical artifact. You created something necessary that is giving voice and giving permanence to a survivor story who is no longer in this world to tell it herself. And had you not written it down, would not be known to other people, and I know when we spoke on the phone, I shared with you one of the most powerful ideas. There's a statement from a Hasidic master from the 1800s who writes that to not write is to steal. And that idea, like what you were saying before, we all have a story. Nobody else can tell Tommy Schnurmacher's story. Nobody else can tell Sarah Crisp's story. We all have unique insight and a unique story and a unique angle and view on this world. And when we don't share that, we're actually robbing the world of something very unique. Did you have the intention when you started this writing process of, I want to give the world memory and share my mother's story, or was it really more for your own kind of therapeutic process? Because both are happening simultaneously, but what was your intention when you sat down to do this?
My intention was that what I told what Gort Sinclair said. I told him these funny stories during the commercial breaks at the radio station, but if I didn't write it down, then it would be gone and they would disappear. And that was a shame because they have value. And they don't only have value because it's my story and it's entertaining, and Mother's story is very interesting. That is a reason they have value, but that's not the only reason. Every single person who's listening today that has gone through things that you and I have not gone through, that it's their personal story. And it's part of the human record, right? And if it's missing, then the human record is incomplete. So in other words, if you go through life and you never write down anything of anything you've ever done or said, then it's lost. And that's a shame. It shouldn't be. Just like it's very interesting when we read about somebody who's written notes in sort of a diary in the 17th century and what they were thinking is very interesting for us 200 years later. So it's very important that you write down what's going on in your life. One, for part of the world record, the human record. And also you find out a lot about yourself, how you feel when you write it, how you feel 3 weeks later, how you feel 2.5 years later when you read it. I just recorded the audio version of the book last week. As you mentioned, it's coming out in October. So when you're recording an audio version, you're reading every single word from page 1 to the last page. And I'm saying it and I'm hearing it. So I learned things about myself by reading my own book 2 years after I'd written it that I hadn't thought of when I was actually typing it. So it has an impact on you as well. And so it's very important not to deprive your friends, relatives, neighbors, whoever reads it, of, like I said, of your personal contribution to the history and the story of the world that is nowhere else. No one else can do it. No one else can write it. No one knows all of the things that you've gone through. No one knows you completely. Even you yourself don't know yourself completely. And as you write, you discover things about yourself. You discover, for instance, you're really uncomfortable about writing a particular topic. There's one area you're very uncomfortable writing about. That's the one to hone in on. Now, you can write it and then tear it up, throw it out, burn it, right? Rewrite it, but get it out there, because from that point of view, right, that's something you can decide if you want to make it part of the record of the world or not. But getting it out on paper helps you to clarify your issues, helps you to clarify your feelings that may be all cluttered in your mind. But when you get it down on paper, you go, no, that's not true. That's not what really happened. What really happened is this. Then you write something else. And as you look at these 4 versions, and you're looking at it, you're learning a lot about yourself. And this is even if you're never planning to publish it, if you're just writing for the pleasure of writing, because it's a record of what happened, and it's a way for you to put up a mirror to your life, to your existence, to your friendships, to your relationships.
So one of my favorite quotes about writing is, I don't know what I think until I see what I write. That's just the act of getting it out helps us obviously clarify that. Now, many parts of your book actually read as like this therapeutic process that you're working through challenges and insecurities and different issues that you're facing. And, some will be more anecdotal of you sharing stories. And then some really we're kind of delving into your psyche as you're processing through that. And one of the things we're really very, very much honing in on at Opyrus is trying to teach people that writing is a conduit for processing. It's a therapeutic avenue to work through all of these different thoughts, feelings, emotions. And when you have to choose words to, solidify them, that act really helps. Can you talk about how writing this memoir, both when you originally wrote it and even now reflecting back on it 2 years later, how that served as this kind of therapeutic processing for you?
Yeah, the way it worked is the therapeutic process was very, very important in terms of I got to understand more. I got to see more of what I was thinking as I was writing down. I mean, Dorothy Parker once said, "I don't like writing. I like having written." And partially that's because it can be it's a tough it's a tough process. It's not something that's easy. It's not something that's easy to handle. It's like I said, you can be assured that what you do with it is yours, right? It's up to you. It's going to be your decision. The point is to get it out in the open is extremely important. That makes a lot of sense to get it there, to get it out in the open, and then for you to decide, I'm going to use this to present somewhere. I'm going to use it only for myself, to help myself. I'm going to use it when I speak to my therapist. I'm going to use it for something as a record to give to my children. There's a number of things that you can use it for, and feel confident in that the decision is yours. In other words, you are the ones who's going to make this decision. You don't have to worry, oh, I don't want so and so to see it. If you don't want so and so to see it, they won't. And by the way, one of the things I heard that I thought was quite interesting, when you're writing about a lot of other people, well, what will they think about it? Like they won't be very happy, because you mentioned something they did that wasn't very nice. So what about that? I said, well, maybe they should have been nicer to you. I mean, if you're a writer, you're going to jot down those things, and you have a duty to be honest and forthcoming to yourself, because the first person you're writing it for is for yourself. Then you can make a decision. It's only for me. I don't want anybody else to see it. Or it's also for friends, or it's also for relatives, or it's also for somebody else.
I think that's one of the big questions that always comes in with memoir writing, is it's a huge responsibility to tell somebody else's story, to have that accountability, because it's obviously through our subjective lens, but to both portray it in a way that's accurate, and also obviously it's always going to be our reflection of it. One of the stories I just want you to share before we take questions from everybody else, there's so much here that I want to get into. And by the way, with this memoir writing, what you're saying with this brings me back to what we started with, even with the interview question. We're about to launch a legacy writing project, which is going to lead people through the memoir process, asking those questions, trying to trigger those memories,
Right.
trying to get those stories out there, because it's like what you said, something that we might quickly forget if it wasn't written down could end up being something that actually weaves through and ties so many different parts together. So you share a story in the book, which again is a very historically unique situation only to your life, but of your joining of John Lennon and Yoko Ono in their peace sit-in. And then this kind of like absolute chutzpah that you had as this young guy kind of carries through, almost like if you manage to pull that off, you can pull off anything. Can you just fill everybody in? Because we gave them the teaser trailer about that in the beginning. And then I want to kind of jump from here into the questions from the audience. So by the way, feel free right now, if you want to start sending your questions through chat, you can send them to me directly. But Tommy, please fill everybody in on that situation.
Right. So this was happening. As a teenager, I liked the Beatles. I was a Beatles maniac. I couldn't get to see the Beatles when they came to Montreal because they came on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish high holiday. But then in 1969, I heard that John Lennon and Yoko Ono were in Montreal at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel for a bed-in for peace. So I thought, wow, I'm going to go down and see them. I call a friend. She's busy doing biology homework. Call another friend. She said, what's the point of going? We're never going to be allowed in. I said, then we'll come back. Anyway, it took me a while. I finally convinced her. I had a fake press pass. And I heard that Yoko was here with her daughter, Kyoko, who was 6 years old. So I brought along a set of crayons. We go down to the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. My friend said, there's no way, it's a huge crowd of teenagers. We'll never get in the other place. We get to the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. No crowd of teenagers in front of the hotel. No teenagers in the lobby. We get into the elevator. My friend Gail, who I went with, we heard on the radio that on the 17th floor, she wants to press the number 17. I said, no. 18. We go one floor above. We get out on the 18th floor to go down the stairs, see some commotion near one of the suites. We walk over to that suite and knock on the door. Several things happened at the same time. As the door opens, there's a security guard with his hand on the back of my neck. The door opens, it's Yoko Ono. The security guard says, I'm so sorry, I don't know how these two got in. We're gonna throw them out right away. And the little girl, Kyoko, says, can I have the crayons? I said, not if we're gonna be thrown out. And Yoko says, no one's gonna be thrown out. She says to the security guard, these are our friends, come in. She invites us in. We go in, Sarah, and then she says to me, would you like to meet John? Like, I think, what? Did you know what she's asking? Do I want to meet John Lennon? Do I want to meet one of the Beatles? Yes. So we meet him, we meet Yoko, a radio station, we're teenagers, so a radio station asks us to interview him. We interview him, we're staying around, no one's throwing us out, so we're not leaving. And then I started to feel sorry for Kyoko, the little 6-year-old kid stuck in this hotel room. Tommy Smothers is there, Petula Clark, all kinds of celebrities are showing up. And I feel sorry for her, and I have a 6-year-old kid sister the same age. So I tell Yoko, maybe I can take Kyoko to play with my sister. She says, oh, great idea. So they give us Kyoko to take for the day. They don't have our name, our address, our phone number, ID, nothing. And we take the Kyoko, plays with my sister, plays in the park. My mother makes them chocolate milk. We spend the entire week there. With them. At the end, they give us each $150, some autographed pictures. And my friend Gail, she takes some cardboard lying on the table there after everybody's left. What's on the table, those pieces of cardboard have the handwritten lyrics to Give Peace a Chance. Years later, she would sell them at an auction for 350,000 pounds sterling. And how I avoided war over Give Peace a Chance is part of the book. I explain how that happened in part of the book. But the important lesson to be learned from this is the chutzpah. In other words, these are the two attitudes. John Lennon's in town. My attitude, let's go see if we can meet him. My friend Gail's attitude, it won't work. It won't work. There'll be too many people. Let's not go. So you don't even try. The same thing applies to writing. Oh, I can't write. Forget it. I won't even write it. No. Do it anyway. Go for it anyway. You don't know what it'll turn out. So what it turned out? That Gail managed to sell those things for 350,000 pounds. It's a pretty good thing that she actually went. That's her retirement, right? That was her retirement fund. So it was a good thing she tried it. Say yes. Say yes to opportunities. Say yes to invitations. Say yes to challenges. And say yes to writing. And this is the most important part. Say yes to yourself. Say yes to your story. Don't deny yourself. Oh, I'm not like I did. I made that mistake myself. I'm not going to write because I'm not Mordecai Richler. I'm not Philip Roth. So I'm not going to write. Big mistake. Right. You're not supposed to be them. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you'll go try to do something. You apply for a job, you won't get it. Or you'll go see a celebrity and you won't get in. You won't get near the place. So what? Nothing's lost. But if you don't even try, you're ripping off yourself. So don't be unfair to yourself. Don't rob yourself. Like you said about that Hasidic master who said, if you keep the story to yourself, it's stealing. Like the world has a right to hear this story or to have it part of the human story, to have it be part of the human record.
I think you just said something huge also. I know I brought this up in past, writer conversations, but one of the things that is amazing when we do write something is I'll still get comments, let's say on articles I wrote, 15 years ago, whatever it may be. And somebody will talk about how impactful this article was. I will read it and I actually forgot the situation that happened. No recollection of that time my kid was in the hospital and that whole, it not only jogged my memory, but it's something that I never would have remembered. It's my own history. We're so sure we remember our own histories. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you. I barely remember yesterday, but when we go back and we have this random history of our own lives, of what it was like earlier on in our relationships with ourselves. You're right. We're creating not just something that other people can learn and gain from. And that's the other thing as well. What is no longer maybe our issue, our challenge, our situation is somebody else's. And when we write it, doesn't really just belong to us. It becomes something that can inspire or, give empowerment to somebody else going through it, even though it's no longer relevant to our own lives.
That's very true. And also you'll write something and somebody will read it 3 months later, 7 years later, whenever, and they'll be impacted by it, and you have no idea. If you recall, when we chatted, you made a speech in New York City 20 years ago, right? And it had a profound impact on me. I remembered it 20 years later. You didn't think of that at the time, that, oh, when I'm making the speech right now, this person's going to remember it 20 years later, they're going to remember it. That's not what was going through your mind. But that's what happened. So imagine, because you told me that you weren't sure if you should do that speech that day. Imagine if you hadn't done it, you would have deprived whoever was in the audience of the knowledge and the information that you had that could have had a great impact, a major impact on their life. So you have an obligation to do it for yourself, and you have an obligation to do it for other people as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump into one of the questions here, but just
Sure.
one idea, which was so interesting that you just brought that up, is so Tommy and I just reconnected because he had remembered my name from this talk I had given 20 years ago, and then saw it with Opyrus and put it together. So it's true, we'll say something or we'll write something or we'll put something out and really wonder if anybody was affected by it, if it impacted anybody. And sometimes we get that feedback and we know, and sometimes we don't, but there's somebody out there in the world and we have no idea. It could have made their day. It could have saved their life. We have absolutely no idea what that ripple effect could be. And
that's very true. In this case, the effect, because I told you that I heard your speech and it had, but I'm telling you, there may have been somebody else in the audience for that speech of yours or for many others that had a huge impact on that you'll never know about, because they won't meet you, they won't tell you, and they may have told somebody else and it could have an impact on the next person. You don't know how far that ripple effect, as you mentioned, you don't know how far that ripple goes.
Absolutely. Right. And once it's in writing, anybody can read it. So I want to jump into, we have a question from Chandra. She writes, having worked in journalism and as a novelist, do you have any advice for merging the nonfiction of people's real life into stories for fiction, specifically when using other people's stories alongside our own?
Right. I mean, yes, you have a right to present the world the way you want. As a writer, you have every right to do everything, other than say somebody's a killer when they're not. I mean, you have to, keep mindful of lying and libel laws, etc. But absolutely. Oh, by the way, this I found absolutely fascinating. I always knew that novelists used a lot of their what happens in their personal life for their work. I mean, they change it around, they modify it, but they use it. Let me tell you, again, referring to Philip Roth, nothing happened to Philip Roth that he did not put in a book somewhere. Not somebody giving him change at the supermarket, not a cab driver at a red light who said that. He would remember it, jot it down, and it would find its way into something. Like, he wasted nothing. It was all raw material. And like towards the end, when he was older, what was he writing about? Getting older and getting sick. Every doctor's visit, every comment the doctor made to him, what the nurse said, what the nurse looked like, the food at the hospital. Like, there's nothing that happened to that man that he didn't use as fodder for his work, for his literature, for his novels.
We have a question from Elaine, and it's interesting because I had asked you part of this question. She writes, while you were writing about your mother, were you mindful of what she'd have to say about it? And Elaine, my question to him earlier today was if his mother ever got to read the book, because it came out after she had passed and it speaks of her passing. So we were aligned with our questioning there.
Would I think about what she would think about it? Yes. And then I thought, I'll think about that later. It crossed my mind. I kept writing about it. She'll be happy about this. She won't be happy about it. I don't know. We'll see later. In the meanwhile, step one, get it down. The important thing is get it down, because it's your story. it's somebody else is there to tell their story. If Gail will tell the story of John and Yoko, what happened to us that week, she wrote a whole book about it, by the way. She wrote like an entire book just on that 1 week with John and Yoko. Her story is different from mine. She doesn't even mention my name in the book. Like, so she looks at it completely differently. So this business, well, if I write about, my ex-husband, then he's going to feel this. That's, you know what that is? That's another excuse not to write. That's like procrastination. By the way, I have every book I've written on how to write and how to promote a book. I have a shelf that looks like what's behind you. As many books as you have over there, I have on that subject. What are they there for? Mainly my books, to procrastinate, to put off writing. And so when you're telling yourself, I don't know if I should write this because so-and-so might not like it, what you really mean is you don't want to write. And you just found a really good excuse not to do it. Do not accept this excuse from yourself. Write it down. Deal with that later. By the way, Philip Roth wrote about his ex-wife, Claire Bloom. She didn't like the way he treated her, which was not very nice at all. He was a horrible man, by the way, but that's another story. She wrote her memoir about what her life was like and what he was like. He was insistent he was going to write a response to her novel, right? So it could go back and forth like that, but do not accept it from yourself as an excuse, because that's what it is. It's another trick you're using to keep yourself away from the desk and from sitting down and writing. And you shouldn't, because it's good for you. It's good for you to do that. And you will feel better at the end of it. And by the way, at the end of an hour, let's say it's not a masterpiece. It's just the clay, right? It's like, oh, I'm bored. I don't know what to write. I have writer's block. It's that kind of stuff. At the end of, let's say you've decided it's half an hour, let's say an hour. At the end of the hour, you get to say to yourself, guess what? You're a writer. You spent an hour writing and it's done. We're not talking, is it good, bad, or indifferent? It's not finished yet. It's unedited, but you did it. Versus not sitting down. And then you can't say you're a writer if you've never sat down and written something. But if you've written an hour in a book and you wrote it and you thought about it and you put it down there in pen, pencil, typewriter, then you're a writer. You've written this material. It's your view at that particular moment.
So Marie's question perfectly fits into this. She asks, you mentioned to make sure to continually write, but at what point do you give yourself that deadline to pull together all of the random thoughts and writings to create a novel? And then it just got added to, and when writing a memoir, when you're writing a memoir also, do you just tell the story unapologetically? But like, where do you make that transition basically between,
put it all out there? First of all, there's a big difference between the novel and the memoir. The memoir is you have to have a plot and a story. We're not talking about novel. I'm talking about memoir. I'm talking about personal writing. Write down all this stuff and at some point stop. Okay, now it's time to sift through it. Get rid of some of it. Expand on some of the rest of it. At some point, you have to stop. Otherwise, you can go on forever. I remember when I was writing the daily column for the Gazette, I said, yeah, I'm going to make it a little better. So I changed it. No, it's still not right. I'm going to make it a little better. I made it a little better. We got to deadline. I'd written it over 15 times and was sort of very close to where I started at the beginning. At some point, you say, enough. And now the raw material, the clays, I brought all the clay from the basement to the table. All the clay's here. Now it's time to shape it. Read this paragraph. Is this good? This paragraph, you like it? Is it great as is? Good. You want to change a little bit? Okay, change. You want to add something to it? Add. Now it's the time to shape it, change it, modify it. And then once you've done that, look at it again. Can you make it a little better? Can you make it sound a little more exciting? Is this interesting? Is it boring? What could make it more interesting? What did you leave out? What were you thinking in the back of your head that you left out? Put that in and see how that is, right? When you add that in as well.
And just, along with this, I think your question is the biggest stumbling block with writing a memoir. You know, this, how do you pull all these different thoughts and feelings together? So that was exactly what we are addressing in the Legacy Project. We have 100 questions. You know, they go through the different parts of life. So, you know, these are like key things. Some are going to speak to you more than others. Some are going to be really interesting. Some are going to kind of, you know, fall flat. You're obviously going to include the John Lennon, Yoko Ono story. You might leave out the, you know, fight with the neighbor story, but you're going to have different things triggered at different points in your life. So it's specifically to get away from that overwhelming fear, because I think that's exactly where people get stuck. You have an entire life. Where do you go? How do you start? How do you pull it together? So that's exactly where we want to help.
And here's a fabulous tip. Where do you start, right? How are you going to start the book, right? I have the answer to that. I have a clear, simple, easy answer to where do you start? In the middle. Whatever stories, whatever comes to mind, that's it. That's how you're starting, and then move on from there. Because everybody's, oh, I want the beginning to be this. I want the beginning to be that. I want the beginning to be this. I want the, and never mind all that. The way I start my book, right, is one day I was walking on Green Avenue on the way to my therapist's office. And I think I was late and I didn't get my Mondo kosher smoked salmon on a bagel. Start there, right there. I'm walking down Green Avenue. I'm about to get a bagel. Go to see the start, bang, in the middle of in this Yiddish expression, mitten drinnen, in the middle of it all. Start right there and move on. Like, there's no definite beginning. Don't start, I was born on, and your birthday. And so that's not the way to start. Don't start there. Start in the middle of it. A discussion you're having with your ex-husband, or he came home and you know what he got me? He did this. Or so-and-so collapsed 3 hours after we got to the hospital. Wherever it is, start there and move along. And the key is the moving. Keep moving along, and be able to tell yourself whatever you decide, whether it's half an hour, at the end of the hour, that you've done the hour. There will be a great sense of accomplishment that you'll have when that happens.
And just to wrap up with the final question that I just got, at what point did you know you were a writer or consider yourself a writer?
Okay, how did that happen? It's very interesting. I wanted to be a child psychiatrist when I was a little kid. I wanted to be a psychiatrist to help the children of movie stars in Hollywood, because I learned how to speak English by reading movie magazines, Photoplay and Movie Mirror, with my mother. She remembered some of the movies she saw in Hungary. We bought the movie magazines and we sort of tried to piece it together. That's how I learned how to speak English. So that was my goal. Then in high school, my friend Lillian was worried about how we would do in English with our Shakespeare class about Macbeth. So she asked me to come to her house, and I went to her house and we were studying Macbeth together. I remember sitting in her room and she started reading it, and it was so bad. She did such a dreadful job. It was like so funny. So I just wrote down the funny things that as badly as she did it. So I did a sort of a satire, like a parody of Macbeth. I put it into the high school newspaper, and all of a sudden I was very popular and everybody loved it. So I said, you know what, the children will have to wait. They'll have to find somebody else to help them. I'm going to become a writer. And part of the reason it was accepted, it was so brilliant. Everybody else wrote all kinds of serious stuff. It was the only funny thing that anyone had submitted. It was a Northmount high school paper. So they accepted it. And I wrote a letter to the editor of the Montreal Star that Juan Rodriguez, the rock critic, had said something about the Beatles, and that it was a brilliant idea. And then I saw my name in print. That's how I became a writer. When you start writing things, then you're a writer. Whether you're going to be published or not, that's another story. But a person is a writer when they write.
Excellent. That is absolutely our message, that everybody is a writer. You just need to write. Absolutely. Yes. So Tommy, I want to thank you so much for your knowledge, for your stories, for your insight. Again, this is Tommy's latest book. I highly encourage you to buy it. It's really phenomenally powerful, read on so many levels. And if you're not already subscribed with Opyrus, I also highly encourage you to do that. We will be, again, unrolling our legacy project very soon, which is the whole memoir writing that Tommy just spoke about his process with. And we're also going to be doing these short writing meditations. The first one is called Helping Our Healing, which again are these short 10 to 15-minute meditations, which just get you writing and processing and putting into words all those vast thoughts and feelings that are out there. So again, this is going to be on the Opyrus site. You'll all get an email with the link to the audio and video. And you'll also be getting an email for our next one that will be happening next month. Tommy, thank you again. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Sarah. Your questions were superb. You're a fantastic interviewer.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Good night. And